So here we've got a lot of different options when it comes to typical conditioning, typical interval work. We've got a work to rest ratio of 1:3, 1:2, 1:1, or even a 2:1. And I'll just say up front, the 2:1 work to rest ratio is something I use very sparingly. I don't use it very often at all. I'll only do it like on harder cardio days when I've definitely scaled back the rest of the workout. Now, again, you can definitely layer in cardio, but just something to be aware of. You don't want to crush your clients. So when my clients are doing actual interval work, I'm telling them that they're not sprinting, but it's faster than a jog. So it's a run speed. If they're running on a treadmill, if they're going on the Airdyne, it's a run kind of speed. They're definitely not slow and steady, but they are definitely not anywhere close to all out 100%. We don't want them at that level. They don't need to be at that level to get the benefits from this. Because at this point, we're just trying to burn a little bit of extra fat and just kind of get their heart conditioned, literally, and their lungs conditioned. And they do not need to be at an all out 100% sprint. It's just like lifting weights. You do not need to lift as heavy as possible every single set to see results. You need to be at around a 7 or an 8 out of a 10 scale to see those results. So same thing with conditioning. Usually it's around a 6 to an 8 scale. That's kind of what I tell people to kind of envision in their head if like the running / jogging / sprinting doesn't really make too much sense to them. So that's another way to kind of describe it to people. It does not need to be a 10. You don't ever really need to ever be at a 10. You want to be around a 6, 7, or an 8, something like that. Sometimes 9, sometimes 5. But so we have, again, 4 different kind of work to rest ratios: 1:3, 1:2, 1:1, and 2:1. What that means is simply if they're doing a 1:3 work to rest ratio, they can do something like 15 seconds on, 45 seconds rest, or 20 seconds on, 60 seconds rest, or 30 seconds on, 90 seconds rest. So 15 seconds is 15 seconds, and 3 times that's 45 seconds. Or 20 seconds times 3 is 60 seconds. Or 30 seconds times 3 is 90 seconds. So I think you get the idea. And when it comes down to it, 15:45 is actually my favorite kind of conditioning modality, just because it's really simple to track. You can get 5 good rounds in 5 minutes. Or if you want them to go like 8 rounds for 8 minutes, it's very easy to track. Doesn't really take a lot of time at all. And they're going to see a lot of good benefits from that. I will sometimes do something like a 2:1. Totally fine, really nothing wrong here. For most people, I'm usually going to do it a 1:3 kind of work to rest ratio, just because, again, it's teaching them they don't need to go super hard. It's also giving them ample time for their heart rate to recover and come back down to a good level. Whereas most people usually don't recover long enough and they're doing their intervals at too high of a heart rate. So they're not really getting the conditioning aspect that we're looking for, because we don't really need them to be high up in that, again, that high heart rate range. That's teaching a different kind of energy system. We want a kind of a conditioning cardio energy system here, especially, again, after that really hard, intense circuit training session. I will sometimes use a 1:1 work to rest ratio. And if you're using something like this, I usually won't go below 30 seconds. I honestly usually won't go below 60 seconds, because if you're going hard, you can't really go super hard for 60 seconds. So people can kind of naturally hit a pretty good stride at 60 seconds and kind of know what good kind of that feels like. Like, it's really hard to go balls to the wall for 60 seconds. And most people know that. So they'll kind of subconsciously hold themselves back at the appropriate level. And since they're holding themselves back at a pretty good level, you don't have to keep the rest at kind of like a higher, you don't need a 2:1 or 3:1 work to rest ratio there. You can do a 1:1. And again, I usually will not do below a 60 seconds. Sometimes, occasionally I will. Usually it's like a 60 seconds. You can also do like a 60-second hard and then a 2-minute rest, or even a 3-minute rest. That's totally fine. It's totally an option again, but it's just just looking at time wise, it just makes things out a little bit longer, so they can only get 3, maybe 4 good intervals in like a 5 to 10 minute kind of range. So that's kind of another point too. When it comes to conditioning, it really is like the last 5 to 10 minutes, and you don't want to just tack it on and throw it on. You do want to have a good reason to have it. And to be upfront and completely honest, if like the client likes and enjoys that, that is a good reason to do that. So there's nothing wrong with putting on there if you think the client's going to enjoy it. If you think the client's going to hate it, leave it out. There's no reason to keep it on, because again, the strength training is basically the main course. And as long as they're training consistently with you and you're keeping out nutrition, they're keeping out nutrition, then good things are going to happen. This final one I want to talk to, the 2:1 work to rest ratio, is not something I'll use super often. I'll use it for more advanced people, because you can get a lot of work done in a really short period of time. Like if you think like 4 rounds of this is what, 2 minutes? Am I doing that right? Is that math right? 2 minutes? Yeah, 2 minutes. Or if you do 8 rounds, it's 4 minutes. This is colloquially what's known as the Tabata kind of routine. But this can be good because you can get really hard workout in a really short period of time. And this is pretty intense. So again, not something I'll use with everybody. I'll use it pretty sparingly for a lot of people. Now, obviously, these modalities lend themselves really easily to machines like the treadmill or Airdynes or rowing machines, because there's a timer on there and you just tell people, go 15 seconds pretty hard and then rest for 45 seconds. So, it's very brain dead simple, and you can just kind of walk away from it from there. But you're certainly not limited to machines. One of my favorite modalities is 150 shuttle runs, where if you have 25 yards of turf or a pretty large outdoor space, you can just tell someone to run up and back and forth 6 times. That's 150 yards. And their work to rest ratio is however long it took them to do the interval, and you just multiply that times 2 or 3. And this can be actually much more beneficial because that work to rest ratio will naturally get higher as a person gets more tired. So let's just say they do the first 150 in 25 seconds, and then the second 150, it takes them 30 seconds. So they've automatically created more rest time for themselves because they've gotten more tired. And again, this can be a little bit better because now their body is kind of self-limiting itself versus being on a machine where the timer is telling them when to go rather than listening to their body. So that is another really good option. Some other options are things like medicine ball circuits or very light body weight circuits, or just a circuit of a few different exercises, because people can kind of bounce through those pretty quickly, just like a circuit training. It is a circuit training. But now the emphasis is definitely more on the cardio section. They're not really using any weights at all at this point. So that is also another really good option. There are a lot of different ways to do this. You don't necessarily have to do what I've programmed here either, like 1-3 work to rest ratio. So I'll give some other kind of examples of when you might not want to use something like this. Just to give you guys another modality for when it comes to conditioning, because this is something I remembered when I was going back through this module. And you can do something that is a 1-5, like a 10-50. Now I'll usually just keep it 10-50 because it's very similar to that 15-45 work to rest ratio, like a similar kind of effort as far as like just 10 seconds versus 15 seconds, and you get a little bit longer break. So these ones are nice because you can do a little bit higher intensities. I still wouldn't go full out sprint on these, but you can go a little bit harder on these because the work is so low and the rest ratio is so much higher. And again, this really ties in well to the ease of tracking because it's just 1 minute long, so you can get a lot of good reps in just 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So it's pretty easy to progress intervals, but you really don't have to do it that often. And what I mean is, again, just referring back to not crushing people with conditioning at the end of the workout. So when you introduce intervals at the end of a workout to somebody, I'll usually start with 3 intervals, regardless of the work to rest ratio. It's usually about where I'll start. And I won't necessarily increase the amount of intervals that they do right away. What I'll look for is to see how well they're recovering between each interval. So like, again, if they're doing 15-45s, are they ready to go after every single interval? That's a really good way to do. It is a bit subjective because some people, will be dying on the inside, but outside they'll just have a super serious face on. But there are ways to kind of tell how someone's feeling in general. You can simply just ask them, how did that feel, out of a 1 to 10 scale after the workout, and then making sure that that's kind of going down. And then obviously you can always just add more intervals to the amount of work to do. And so again, I'll start at 3. Usually I won't do more than 8. Sometimes 10 to 12 for really advanced people who are doing a little bit more conditioning work and a little bit less strength work. But general 3 to 8 is kind of the range. And it's usually about like 5 to 6 at the top end for most people. Again, 8's a little bit more for some people, and maybe even up to 12 for a select kind of few.